The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Howard Phillips Lovecraft. How many videos did you ever see starting with this sentence? I think I saw 2. Lovecraft is well known for being innovative in 2 fronts, those being respectively the introduction of cosmic horror to the literary corpus and being absurdly racist even for the standards of his time. But at least he did have a very cute cat. I wonder what his name is. Regardless of what opinion you have on him, you have to admit that he was pretty good at writing horror, introducing groundbreaking concepts such as fish people and air conditioning. And this innovation ties into the subject of this video. In a time when horror stories were restricted to a very traditional format, Lovecraft broke the mold by introducing a very interesting way to induce terror on the readers. He created something brand new, something unknown, something to be feared. An unconventional way to terrify someone. Even though cosmic horror began as something innovative, at this point thousands of stories have already used it as a core element. It's a hard genre to write, and it typically has to be really well done to elicit a special feeling of gut-wrenching horror. As common as it may be nowadays, it's still nowhere near as common as traditional horror. Slasher films, monsters, something jumping at the screen and yelling really loudly. Those can all work pretty well, they still do, hence why they're so frequently seen in the more mainstream media. But the format is so overused that a lot of the times the viewer/player/reader is already accustomed to the scare, so catching them by surprise becomes increasingly harder. And I believe that this is the reason why media that works with the more classic, commonly known types of horror such as Outlast doesn't scare as much as other type of media that try to do something different. Now don't get me wrong, when Outlast first came out I was shitting my pants, but nowadays if I look at the gameplay of that, I mean, it doesn't get me the same way. And a funny thing that happens in 2 of the 3 examples that I'll bring to you in this video is that the fear is not even an intended effect that the user is supposed to feel, but rather a side effect of the situation they're put in. I will show you 2 games that make a pretty good job at keeping you on edge, even though scaring you is not their primary objective, as well as share with you what is potentially the scariest and most disturbing horror story I have ever read. Let us begin with a simple one. The gameplay you've been seeing in the background belongs to a game called The Complex Found Footage. It has a sequel called The Complex Expedition, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll just classify them both as one single game. They are both very good walk-in simulators that are set in the back rooms. For those of you who don't know what the back rooms are, I am not going to explain it in too much detail, but essentially they are a labyrinth with roughly twice the size of Earth's surface area, composed entirely of randomly concatenated rooms just like the ones you're seeing in the background footage. In both games, you enter the back room somehow and you're left there to wander through the halls looking for an exit. I'll stop talking for a few moments just for you to take in how atmospheric and immersive this experience can be. This is literally all you do the whole game. It's just a walk-in simulator focused on having you explore this weird place. Even though there are no jump scares in the game, there's always a constant and lingering sense of dread that something might jump out at you from the darkness as you explore the derelict halls. At least from my experience, there's never a point where the game does that. And precisely for that reason, it is capable of maintaining the tension throughout its entire experience. It's the fear of the unknown. You're not scared that you might be alone in the back rooms, you're scared that you might not be. This is where, in my opinion, a lot of games lose their impact by immediately showing you the monster or creature that will be chasing after you. But the truth is that doesn't matter how good the monster's design is, whatever we create in our minds is always going to be scarier than what we see on the screen. When you begin the game, you get the feeling that there might be something in there with you, maybe lurking in a dark corner or in a different area. Every time you see a break in the pattern, you can't help but wonder that maybe this time you'll find something that will rip your tongue out through your ass, but you never do. Even though you begin to get used to the gameplay loop, the feeling that too much time has gone by without them trying to scare you never really leaves your mind. This game has many opportunities to scare you on multiple different occasions, but it forfeits that in favor of keeping the tension high. Any scares that you do get are probably from someone sneezing in real life or from the sound of your footsteps changing the moment you step on a different type of floor. And then, right by the end when you're just getting accustomed to the feeling of solitude, this is the most in-your-face this game will ever get, but I cannot stress this enough. The amount of time this game takes before it actually tries to scare you with something as simple as a shadow getting out of sight is, to me, a lot more effective than constantly throwing gores and scares at the player. That simple interaction immediately doubles attention, as not only do you confirm the doubt you had in the beginning of the game, that you are not alone, but it also tells you that whatever is in there with you is actively stalking you. And then, an extremely unsettling possibility crosses your mind. Wait, was I being followed this whole time? On to the next game that scares you in an unconventional manner, only this one doesn't even market itself as a horror game. In fact, it doesn't even have horror elements in it, short of maybe 2 documents you find. The game I'm talking about is, of course, Subnautica. The last time I played this game was in 2019, but it's one of my favorites for a reason. In case you don't know Subnautica, which I find highly unlikely, it is a survival game that is set on an oceanic planet. Your ship lands? Is it land if it's underwater? In the middle of bumfuck nowhere, and you're tasked with the simple goal of finding a way to escape. I said this wasn't a horror game, and indeed, if you're looking at this sunlit, shallow area, it doesn't look like it. When you look at fear in an objective way, it is nothing more than a defense mechanism that either tells you to not fuck with something or to fucking run from something. Naturally, it's a primordial feeling that is reasonably present in almost every animal with non-trivial amounts of cognitive activity. And let's be honest, there's nothing more primordial and scary than the ocean. There are 3 ways in which Subnautica will mess with your head, those being respectively info hazards, something screaming or lurking in the distance, and... To my knowledge, this game only has 2 things that could be considered jump scare animations, and they both consist of things lunging at you. But other than the implication that they might destroy your submarine and set you back a little bit, they're hardly something that actively makes you jump out of your seat, which is good. Alfred Hitchcock famously said that if you were to record a scene of people conversing at a table, and then after 10 minutes a bomb goes off that kills everybody, you get a few seconds of shock from your audience. But if you do that scene again, but instead just as the characters are sitting down at the table, you tell the audience that there's a bomb planted somewhere in the room that will go off in 10 minutes. What you get is 10 minutes of tension. Both the Complex and Subnautica make use of these extended periods of heightened tension to either intentionally or unintentionally terrify the player. That anticipation that something terrible might happen without it actually happening is often worse than the actual scare itself, because it compels you to keep your guard up all the time. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who does this, probably not, but whenever I'm consuming horror media, I usually manage to avoid getting affected by the jump scares either through predicting accurately when one will occur, or through sheer desensitization alone. So when you put someone in a situation like this, where there is the constant promise of a jump scare but almost never the delivery of one, you found a new way to mess with someone's head. A new way to terrify them. For our last exhibit, I will give you yet another example of another type of horror. One that I don't even know how to classify. I guess it could be considered psychological horror, maybe even existential, but what it most certainly isn't is classical horror. It's a creepypasta out of all things, which throughout my years of reading horror I've learned to associate either with the literary equivalent of 24 karat gold or the most milquetoast type of shit ever. But this one, I've consumed thousands of horror stories at this point over the last few years. This one is by far one of the most tormenting things I have ever had the pleasure of reading. It's a story by Peter Frost David. Allow me to read the title and the opening line to you. If you're armed and at the Glenmont Metro, please shoot me. Make it a headshot, shoot in the temple, aiming slightly downwards. I need to make the bullet travel the shortest distance through my brain before it hits my hippocampus. If I'm lucky, the sensation of the gunshot ripping through my skull will only last a few decades. If, perchance, that opening managed to catch your interest in the slightest, I beg you to give it a read. I'll leave a link in the description. I'm going to spoil the beginning very lightly, so if you really want to experience this story without any prior knowledge, go ahead and pause the video. I'll be waiting for you right here. According to the site, it should take about 12 minutes to read it fully. This is a story about a guy who tested an experimental drug that has the intended side effect of deaccelerating an individual's perception of time. Only that this goes very, very wrong, as you can tell by the title. I cannot emphasize enough how excruciating it can be to see this man trapped inside a body that is thousands of times slower than his mind, seeing hours and days go by in his consciousness when in actuality only a few minutes have passed. By the end of the story, I was left with 2 things: a lingering sense of morbidity and a really weird feeling of exhaustion, both provoked by the intense detail of the main character's experience. As weird as this may sound, it felt refreshing to find something that could leave me so emotionally drained in such a short amount of time. I tried figuring out why, and I came to the conclusion that, much like in the other two examples, this story is innovative in its approach to disturbing the reader. The bulk of my experience with horror stories are either from r/snowsleep, creepypasta, games, or even just books, and this is the first time I've seen someone explore this facet of horror. Other than this story, I've seen one other time when someone tried to use a bad trip as a setting for a horror story, and there's so much untapped potential in that. Every one of these examples are so creative with the way they mess with your mind, and I feel like there's so much potential in using these new artifices to create new ways to terrify. It is by breaking the mold and generating a new unknown to fear. Of course, you can make it work the traditional way, but when you look at experiences like Doki Doki, Inscription, or even a book like House of Leaves and see how critically acclaimed they are for finding new ways to terrify you, it's self-evident that there's an untapped market there. And I don't think that it will be long before we see another title that will go viral because of how it messes with the head of whoever is experiencing it, be it through its format, its creativity, or how it breaks expectations. Says the guy whose horror gaming experiences is summarized by 97 minutes of FNAF 2 in 2015. No, but for real, there are some moments that can fuck you up. Just look at this one.
Begin audio prompt in 3, 2, 1.